This is episode 554 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, it is election day, and from the looks of the polling places around the Albuquerque metro area, not a lot of people are really aware of that fact, or at least in the early voting stage. Um, but hopefully, we will see a good turnout today. So, folks, if you are live streaming this, if you're on Facebook, uh, catching this in a timely fashion here today, please make sure you get to the polls, especially in these low turnout elections. Your vote can have an even more outsized impact than it would in a presidential or another major election. So, folks, get out there to vote, please.
Yes, and your vote counts if you cast it. And the ballot's pretty short. I have a feeling that we're not going to see big lines if you didn't make it to early voting to vote in person today as well, as you said.
Yeah. So let's kind of, we don't normally talk about political issues in other states, but I do think it's always good to highlight some of the things that we'll be watching as the results come in tonight. Uh, there's a few states that do have gubernatorial elections going on in this typically off year cycle. Um, Sometimes can be a bellwether for future political gains and losses in the bigger election, which will be held next year. That didn't necessarily uh, come out with last election. We'll talk about Virginia. Virginia always does off-year elections, but Glenn Youngkin winning 2 years ago did not necessarily result in or have coattails for big gains for Republicans in 2024. I know they expected big gains, but they didn't happen. But Glenn Youngkin, a Republican governor of Virginia, has a 56% approval rating and is hoping to get a legislative mandate in a Republican legislature. It's currently, I believe, one house is maybe tied and the other house is controlled by the Democrats. So that is one to watch. Kentucky's Andy Beshear, a Democrat, has been leading Republican Attorney General Daniel Cameron, but this is a red state now, Kentucky, and Beshear's taken some political stances in opposition to school choice and was very hawkish on the COVID lockdowns. Again, in a state that is much redder than most. Mississippi, another red state, Governor Tate Reeves is hoping to win re-election. He's both been a beneficiary of slash advocate for the Mississippi model for education reform, which has resulted in big gains in education in Mississippi, as well as some income tax cuts that I think those are good policy, and we'll see if he receives a second term in the state of Mississippi. Pennsylvania's Supreme Court, uh, those are big races. There's voter ID laws that the court has rejected. They changed states' voter laws during COVID-19. Very activist, very left-wing court. We'll see what Pennsylvania does with regard to its state Supreme Court. And then we get to some of those ballot measures. Number one across the country, Ohio, like Kentucky, is another reddish state. Issue one is on the ballot, which, if adopted, would establish a state constitutional right to, quote, make and carry out one's own reproductive decisions, which is a pretty broad pro-choice, pro-abortion law that could be enacted in a red state. And that's going to have a lot of impacts, both, I think, on the future of other states as they look at abortion policy, as well as uh, you know, it could be a temperature now that we're getting a little bit away from Dobbs. Is this still the salient issue in political races? I think it's safe to say that the Dobbs decision was one of many factors that wound up keeping Democrats in a better position than they seemed likely to achieve last election in 2022. So, not the only, but certainly one thing that Democrats ran on. Certainly, Michelle Lujan Grisham did right here in New Mexico. But Ohio's a red state. We'll see what shakes loose there. Closer to home, Colorado Proposition HH would undermine the best in the nation taxpayer protections afforded by Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights by allowing the state to retain and spend revenues that would otherwise be required to refund to residents. Uh, Colorado, while in many, many ways a very progressive blue state, uh, its Taxpayers Bill of Rights allows it to stand apart not just from New Mexico, where the politicians just spend all the money when it comes in, especially from oil and gas. But generally speaking, they have had this TABOR, Taxpayers Bill of Rights, in place since the 90s, and it has kept Colorado's government spending in check at a fraction of the cost per person or the spending per person that we see here in New Mexico. So that'll be interesting to watch. Here in New Mexico, Santa Fe is voting on a 3% excise tax on home sales of more than $1 million. I had an opinion piece in the Santa Fe New Mexican on this. Uh, I don't expect great things out of the Santa Fe electorate. It's a very easy thing to do, is to tax other people, quote unquote. But $1 million home in Santa Fe is not exactly a mansion. And with the inflation in home prices and housing in general, and no inflation adjustments in this particular ballot measure, more and more houses will fall into that $1 million category. And it's bad policy to begin with. If you want more affordable housing, which is what this would ostensibly fund, make the housing less regulated, remove tax burdens, those kinds of things. Other issues in Albuquerque APS, Albuquerque Public Schools Board, is up for election. There are races there, as well as City Council. We could see some pretty significant ideological shifts in both bodies. In terms of Albuquerque City Council, they are currently moderately to the right of Mayor Keller. Uh, certainly it would be great to keep a more conservative city council than the mayor, and APS also more to the right than the legislature governor combo there in Santa Fe. And will that situation continue to hold, or will the unions get total domination of the education system with APS and the statewide policymakers? Las Cruces, 7 candidates are running for mayor, and there will be city council races, also school board races. Miyagishima is a relative moderate. He's been mayor in Las Cruces for several years, since 2007. This is the first time they will elect a new mayor since then. So Las Cruces has really gone hard progressive left, but broadly. Miyagishima, I don't think he would have been considered a moderate back in 2007. So now he is definitely among the more moderate voices in southern New Mexico, Las Cruces area politics. So we'll see what those races have in store, but they will all be determined with the help of ranked choice voting. And that is a system that certainly is controversial and questionable, and could take some time to find out what the results are in Las Cruces. So, Wally, a lot there to go through, but I definitely welcome your thoughts on any or all of those items.
Yeah, I will certainly not comment on all of them, but there's 3 or 4. First of all, the 3% tax in Santa Fe, that is a fascinating one because, yeah, this As you alluded to, the city of Santa Fe has done everything it can to stifle development and make new housing more costly, less affordable, and less prevalent. And now they have a perceived need to change that, and they're going to do it if this passes on home sales. I'm not making a prediction, but that's one that I'm fascinated by. I I just don't know how that will turn out, but it's one of those things that if this happens in Santa Fe, look for more of the same. And it's one of those things. The government, the city government in Santa Fe takes an expansive view of their role, and if this passes, I think there may be more about that. The Colorado Taxpayer Bill of Rights. That's something that many states who are proud of and see the advantages of limited government look at Colorado with envy. I certainly know I do. It will be interesting. I have a feeling that the taxpayers are not going to get rid of that, but that's another one. And then just finally, my thoughts on the city council race. There's a lot at stake with the Albuquerque City Council race in terms of what's going on, but it's interesting if I were to say, just summarize the candidates and the races. This is one that turned from instead of a race of ideas and policy, became a race that ethics in terms of whether you went to jail and what degree you had and all the like really took that over. And we'll see what the impacts were on that. There were certainly some casualties, some people dropped out because of that. But it's one of those. It's very interesting, in a way. Don't get me wrong. I do think ethics are really important for politicians. I'm not one that believes that's ethical politician is always an oxymoron, just some of the time. But I think that's important. But I do think that the policy issues kind of have gotten drowned out because of that, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. So
Yeah, there's been ethical issues mostly in the District 6 race with regard to the gentleman in question and his claims to have been convicted of a felony that were not actually true. He ultimately did drop out. Another candidate, Rogers, she had some nonprofit filing issues that she ran afoul of. Um, there are other candidates in that race. It's by far, originally, especially the more crowded of the races. A lot of the others, uh, the downtown one is an exception. The Help Group, the Conservative, the Business Coalition is not involved in that one at all. If you want to find out more about the specific people being voted on, go to the podcast with Carol White from a few weeks ago, and she will helpfully explain to you what the relevant races are in at least in the city of Albuquerque. So uh, we could wind up with a more conservative city council or a less conservative city council, or things could completely go off the rails and it could be back to square one, which was a rubber stamp for Mayor Keller. That would obviously be a worst case scenario. Now, it doesn't mean that just because you have a more conservative city council does not mean that they're always going to do what you want them to do. As a conservative, as a limited government advocate, we're talking about human beings, politicians. We're talking about the city of Albuquerque. We're talking about numerous different political forces weighing on them. And sometimes they do things that are very questionable. But we're going to talk about one of them right now that is going to be voted on at the upcoming city council meeting on Wednesday. So the day after the election, uh, and all bets are off. Of course, there's going to be lame duck members on that city council. What is coming up is a proposal to make the zero fare pilot program, zero bus fare, that is, pilot program, a permanent feature of Albuquerque, at least so far as a city council vote and signature of the mayor at the time make something permanent. Certainly, it would be a thing that would continue for the foreseeable future. Obviously, uh, nothing can go on forever, but there was a report that was created by the transit system, uh, seeming to analyze crime issues and the bus system itself and whether crime had increased since September of 2021 and then through January to December of 2022, whether various illegal incidents were increased, decreased, or stayed the same based on the free bus fares. Now, first and foremost, when you're doing a report, it is very helpful to have some kind of consistency in the data. And bus bus ridership over the last 5 years, we'll just say, since the beginning of COVID, has been truly all over the place.
Right.
And many factors in our society have been kind of jumbled due to law enforcement issues, due to various forms of protest, et cetera. But uh, this study goes back to only January of 2022, and it shows the ebbs and flows of what are incidents, mental health, suspicious situation, disorderly conduct, traffic, intoxicated, loitering, trespassing, other, wellness, medical. And it has various data points showing that they increase or decrease. But since January of 2022, that's since the program was already implemented, the free fare program. Now, I would like to see much more data. I would like to see you got to have at least at the bare minimum. I know this is crazy, but at the bare minimum, you need data from before the policy was implemented.
Right.
You can't have data starting when the program was implemented and then moving forward from there. Uh, the media have portrayed this, and I know that that we'll just say that the reporters are not what they used to be, but it's never been great. But certainly, Albuquerque Journal and other media outlets are reporting this like there's some kind of finding that there's no relationship between free fares and additional security incidents. It certainly seems anecdotally to be the case because they're struggling to find bus drivers and the like, but um, it's equally hard to prove that there's been a rise in cases as it is to disprove that there's been a rise in cases. It's basically a garbage in, garbage out report, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. That is like the basis for that report is really bad, and it was like it reminds me of, let's say I'm a financial advisor and I take your money, your $100,000, and invest it and turn that $100,000 into $50,000. But then, a month after you lost all your money, it went up to 51,000. I'm like, Paul, things are getting better. Over the study period, it's gone up every time, and that's like the bus system. It is, yeah, you're taking two data points, and so I guess from my perusal of the reporting is, I think the most you can say is it's really bad and it hasn't gotten worse recently. That's the most you can say. But as you alluded to, it's they can't get bus drivers. The bus system's dying a slow death because of that in and of itself. And I think that if they can't get drivers to drive, it doesn't matter what your statistics say. The other thing is that we have data capture problems, and when you're looking at such a short period of time during a period when things are really all over the board, and I am convinced a lot of crimes don't get reported in Albuquerque in areas I'm familiar with. Whether they are all getting reported in the bus system or not, I really don't have a feel for that. But the point of it is that the bus system is in bad shape, and if this is the approach that you're going to do to say, "Oh yeah, it's everything is fine," I think you're going to be pretty disappointed long term, given what we've already seen and the fact that how much ridership is down, things have changed, and again, the biggie is that if you don't have bus drivers, you don't have a bus system, no matter whether you charge for fares or not.
Yeah, and upon further review, the free bus fares took effect on January 1 of 2022, and the um, decision was made in City Council in September of 2021. But this report, also frustrating, is that it was not available on the city's website. It was only available through personal connection with Councilor Dan Lewis, who provided it. And it's just, yeah, it doesn't have relevant dates. I mean, it shows January 2022 and through the year, which again, that's when the free bus fare thing started. Um, just like ridership is of the same situation, it's way, way down from before COVID. It's rebounded slightly, and it's likely going to rebound slightly over time. But we're talking about orders of magnitude lower ridership. Um, that is going to impact the overall situation. And I'm not saying that the inability to find bus drivers is wholly related to this, but certainly it's partially, I think, related to it. It's you know, if I have an economic principle ever named after me, Wally, you know what it is, which is that before COVID, it was people looking for jobs. After COVID, it's employers looking for people to work.
Yeah.
And so they definitely see that trend rising when it comes to bus drivers. But uh, it's it's a messy situation. It's basically a preference situation of city council, and I would very much like the more moderate, more sane city council to not make free buses a permanent situation. One more case on the local level. Our Rio Grande Foundation, our case against the uh, city council donation to Planned Parenthood, uh, was allowed to move forward. The co-plaintiff was removed. A abortion counseling kind of pro-life service called CareNet was found not to be in standing. But Guessing versus Yara, Yara, is a case that challenges the donation of taxpayer funds to a private organization. Uh, City Council, especially Tammy Feeblecorn, Councilor Feeblecorn, uh, sponsored the 250,000 donation to, quote, provide vital support for Planned Parenthood as the Supreme Court of the United States was considering the Dobbs decision. This is after the leak, but before the final decision. You just can't donate public money, or you shouldn't be able to donate public money to private groups. Rio Grande Foundation, our bylaws, we would not be able to take advantage of that situation because it's explicitly written that we do not take government dollars. But the Planned Parenthood obviously has those contracts, but donations, without requirements are a different story. So uh, we'll see where things go from here. The wheels of justice grind slowly.
Yeah, and Paul, you may or may not know, but is this case brought under the wait for it anti-donation clause, or was there some other? I
It
mean,
was,
yeah.
yes. And
So
the
it's one
Liberty
of
Justice Center is
yeah,
our attorneys. You can find out more about them by clicking on the link in the post at Heirs of Enchantment.
yeah.
So, yeah.
But that is a, as I understand it, constitutional provision of the state of New Mexico that that prevents that sort of thing. But that will be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, you got having standing and having the case go forward.
Yeah.
That's the first step. Absolutely.
And a brief little snippet that I posted with it, with the post says, the state's anti-donation clause prevents governmental agencies from city councils and school districts to the state legislature from giving funding to individuals or private entities. If this is not found to be a violation, then I, I think the anti-donation clause is dead. There's definitely been some actions taken to weaken it over the years, but this is really as cut and dry as you can possibly imagine. Wally, homeschooling has taken off, especially during the COVID era. And we had a conversation right here on this show with my wife and daughter as we had gotten rolling back in, I believe it was 2020, with the COVID pandemic. But Washington Post has caught on to this trend. A lot of interesting data there. Some of it I question, but I don't question the idea that overall, with the rise during COVID and then a slight decline post COVID, 51% increase in homeschooling in the United States, with a 7% increase in private schooling and a drop of 4% for public schools. Public schools being still by far the biggest provider of educational services, private schools having seen a nice significant uptick, homeschooling, huge uptick, but a lot of interesting discussion there. We don't talk about homeschooling much because they tend to stay out of the limelight, stay out of the political conversation. New Mexico has a relatively favorable homeschool law. Interestingly enough, according to the Post, New Mexico was not among the states that saw the biggest upticks in in homeschooling. I question the data on that, or question other sources which I found that indicate that New Mexico is not big in terms of the proportion of people doing homeschooling in New Mexico. I think from my personal interactions, it seems like a lot of folks do homeschool in New Mexico relative to the population, but it's hard to find the data. Again, just like the transit report, although this is a actual data problem, some states do not require homeschool families to report to the state. New Mexico does, but it's pretty hands off after that.
Yeah, and Paul, this data capture thing is huge. When you do analysis of any kind, and it seemed during the COVID area, the Albuquerque public schools in particular lost students like crazy. Did they show up on another list, or are they just out there blowing in the wind? And then my question is, if they're blowing in the wind, we don't know where they are. There's two or three kinds of alternate schooling to the traditional public schools. There's private schools, as you say. There's charter schools, and then there's homeschooling. And then there's this thing that I don't think it's talked about much, is that bad homeschooling, or if somebody says, "Oh yeah, we're homeschooling," but they're not really doing it, it's basically just a another form of dropout. And I haven't heard or seen anybody even talk about that. I'm not saying it's a big problem, but like a lot of things that there's not a lot of data, you don't know. What we do know, because the best data is there, is that the in New Mexico, public school enrollment in many districts is way down, and we're just not exactly sure where the students always went.
Yeah, and this is honestly one of those areas where my data-driven, I want to know more information side conflicts with my personal privacy side. And we'd love to see more information, more evidence that homeschooling does work. Obviously, there are some families, some people out there who may have warped worldviews, who just don't want to let their kids out of the house, and there's all kinds of challenges with that. Personally, as somebody who was part of a homeschooling efforts within my own family during the 2020 to 2021 school year, so fall of 2020 to the spring of 2021, and we worked diligently with the homeschool process. You can cover quite a bit more material in a much shorter time, and really just give the kids a more in-depth view of a wide variety of subject areas in a relatively small period of time. And that's just a function of one-on-one, one-on-two interaction versus one-on-20 plus kids. And not all of them have the same knowledge base. Not all of them have the same interests. There's distractions. There's distractions in Catholic school too. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that multiple kids in a small area wind up distracting each other. So those distractions obviously are lessened in the Catholic school or private school environment. So
Or in homeschooling, but they are there. There are distractions at homeschooling as well. I know, you know what I mean?
sure,
People are
there's
people,
always
kids are
distractions.
kids. There's always distractions.
Yeah, but yeah, interesting report there from the Washington Post. Inflation has hit New Mexicans in the car insurance pocketbook. Market Watch reports that in 2023 alone, 34% increase in car insurance rates. That is a gigantic increase. Overall, across the country, states in the United States saw a increase of 16%, which is still very robust. Obviously, one of the more inflation impacted items. Definitely some food items were impacted heavily, but insurance really skyrocketing in just 1 year. According to the report, they say claims payouts are the single biggest expense for insurance companies, representing 70 to 80% of their expenses in a given year. Medical claims are a significant portion of these payouts, and that healthcare costs have skyrocketed. The cost of car repairs and replacements is up. A lot of supply chain issues, well documented. New Mexico has a lot of auto theft, fourth highest among states. So that exacerbates the situation, and the authors don't see prices coming down. I did a little more research, and with the EV addition to the fleet and the governor's desire to impose EVs on people in New Mexico, EVs, where when applicable, cost a great deal more than the traditional gas model. Uh, Comparisons I found include the Chevy Spark, where it's a 19% differential, Kia Soul 23% differential, and Fiat 500 32%. So same basic car, one's electric, one's gas, significantly higher cost. Higher cost equals more cost to the insurance. If you have to replace something, and then EVs are an entirely new supply chain. So there's various parts and components that may be in short supply and may cause delays and additional costs. So uh, just a reminder, we are asking people to go to keepyourcarsinm.com, provide comment to the Environmental Improvement Board opposing the governor's mandate of electric vehicles. More information at keepyourcarsinm.com.
Yeah,
Wally?
yeah, just a few thoughts. As you say, medical costs are a huge part of car insurance. Because if you wreck a car, even if it's totaled, if you have full coverage, that's capped by the value of that car. Whereas medical costs, just they can be outrageous. In the literal olden days, of which I was a part, it used to be if you had a car paid off, you could maybe get rid of your comprehensive insurance and just pay for the liability, which is basically medical, and it would dramatically reduce your
Right.
insurance costs. Not anymore. The biggest part of it is that liability and medical costs. Uh, the fact that EVs are more expensive, I certainly think there's something to that. I've read there's some countries that are struggling actuarially with how to do that, and there's been issues with that. One thing I will say to this point, I have ridden in an EV that and let's put it out there. To this point, EV and Tesla are almost synonymous. They're the huge market shareholder, and if you have the ones with the multi motors, the amount of acceleration and how quickly you can get those vehicles going very fast is literally staggering. It's like you feel your head sinking into the headrest. One thing I will say to this point is that I have not seen Tesla drivers being the ones that are driving erratically out there on the freeway, racing around and using what is available to them. It tends to be other cars. Now, uh, with an EV mandate, if we're going to take EVs to a broader group and get them in the hands of the street racers that are out there. That may change, but that's one thing that I think has been a advantage because those things are extremely powerful. But to this point, they're not who I see out there, and so I know. Anecdotal observation is not the only way, but it's like when you drive on the freeway enough, every time on I-40, I get on the freeway at Wantabo and go towards downtown, I will catch a race. By the time I get to the Big I, there will be cars racing down there going 3 and 4. And maybe if we got rid of a few of those, our insurance rates would go down because I have a feeling they crash quite often. So,
Yeah, well, that's a complicated one, Wally. I tend to think that the higher income, high education, I'm sure you could do a market analysis, but I can pretty much guarantee that Tesla drivers are one percenters by and large in terms of their higher income levels and education levels.
to this point,
To this point,
yep,
yeah. And
absolutely.
I think that probably is a selection bias issue when it comes to the street racers and those kinds of things. But yeah, it's interesting concept. I guess as somebody who lives within earshot of Coors Boulevard, uh, and again, keep your cars nm.com. Do not want the governor mandating that everybody drive electric vehicles. But late at night when you're on one of these beautiful warm evenings or moderately cool evenings that we have, an electric vehicle racing up and down Coors at least won't interrupt my sleep.
Exactly.
Uh, that's the one silver lining there, I suppose. So
Yeah, if we're going to mandate something that's going to improve auto safety, let's mandate that everybody be middle-aged and very affluent. That would do it. So
yes, all right.
that
Quick
was a joke.
rundown of
A joke, joke.
quick rundown of some more EV stories. Again, keep your cars nm.com to oppose the regulations imposed by the governor and the EIB that will be discussed here in about a week. EV market could become the next big flop from the economist or from an economist. EVs create profit potholes for major U.S. automakers, GM and Ford. And again, these stories are very mainstream. Both of these are Yahoo Finance stories. According to the profit pothole story, the Ford EV unit posted a quarterly loss before interest and taxes of 1.33 billion in the most recent quarter. That's an accelerating loss after 1.08 billion in the prior quarter. It also cut production of the Mustang Mach-E while scaling back about $12 billion in planned investments in the EV segment, including delaying its second battery plant in Kentucky. EVs are piling up at car dealerships. General Motors saw its quarterly profit reduced by about 1.5 billion because of higher costs and the impact of selling more EVs. Automakers are pumping the brakes on the EV transition for obvious reasons. When you're losing money hand over fist, I think it goes without saying. And finally, Panasonic, a big battery manufacturer, cut outlook for EV demand and battery production, cutting its profit outlook by 15%. I know folks on the left, if any of them do listen to this show, profits far from being a negative or some kind of greedy aspect of capitalism actually are the best determinant or tool for determining how companies should invest their resources.
The efficient allocation of capital. It's
Yes.
yes, if you're making a profit, that means that people would come in and want to do that. And if you're losing money hand over fist, that might mean you may not want to invest in that.
Yeah, in fact, F.A. Hayek, the Nobel Prize winning economist, that was his key insight is that, it's not just that socialism fails or communism fails. They fail because they do such a incredibly poor job of allocating resources in society, and profits are the best way ever devised by human beings to determine where to invest more, resources and do more activity because they are, based on individuals across the entire economy, across society, making millions and millions of decisions. And if you are not making a profit, it is a good indicator that you are not in a area, not producing a product that people want or demand. And yeah, we can have subsidies, and those can deform and derange markets. EVs being a prime example where you're getting subsidies and mandates across the board, but you still can lead that horse to water, but you can't make them buy an EV.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that, and we've seen it in the tech industry is capital is huge. It takes a lot of capital to build these new plants. It takes a lot of capital for a middle income person to buy a car. And, most middle income people are not paying cash for their vehicles, they're having to finance them. And when the interest rate has gone from 1, 2, 3% to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%, that dramatically increases that cost. And getting to the efficient allocation, there's a lot of subsidies out there for a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that you can basically subsidize bad ideas or things that don't work or that aren't, what should we say, workable in the marketplace. No one tends to have that much money in the long term.
Exactly. So, with that, we will let things go. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.